gentlemen, let's call this meeting to order, and this is the 16th meeting of the National Defense Committee, and we are continuing our study on recruitment and retention, and we're joined by our two witnesses, Professor Christian Leprag and June Winger, National President of the Union of National Defense Employees. Before I call on Professor Leprag for his 5-minute opening statement, ladies and gentlemen, we continue to run the clock here. We're 16 minutes late from starting. I propose to shave a minute off everybody on the first round and a minute off everybody in the second round, and hopefully that will get us somewhere close to the hour that we have allocated. Unless I see wild and crazy objections, that's what we're going to do. So with that, Professor Leprag, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je vais intervenir en anglais, mais je prends vos
I'm able to answer questions in both official languages, and thank you for inviting me.
For government operations on the topic of procurement. Today I've been asked to share my expertise on recruitment and retention in the Canadian Armed Forces and across the defense team. Last week's subjects and this week's testimony are related. It can take up to 15 years to envision, initiate, procure, and implement a new system such as the Next Generation Air Force Fighter program. Less apparent is that it takes just as long to generate the experienced workforce to operate these complex systems. Yet for years, the CAF has had to privilege operations. Now people need to be reconstituted, but the people and equipment systems are out of sync. Regeneration and maintaining the force and align that with equipment modernization. CAF now suffers from a sizable experience gap, especially at the level of junior NCMs and officers. This missing middle is the center of gravity for the CAF. This middle force does the work of recruiting, instructing, absorbing on units, and supervising on units. In terms of readiness, this presents a significant risk of failure at a time of growing demand on the CAF and complexity of missions. For years, the CAF has been sufficiently robust for the nature of conflict such that the government could choose the force packages that worked for the CAF. Meanwhile, baseline foundational capabilities have been eroded. But in the new security environment, government no longer has the luxury of choosing baseline or tailor-made packages. The shortfall bears considerable reputational risk as admonishments of Canada by both the Secretary General of NATO and the Biden administration suggest. The missing middle are not only the members who train the force and operate equipment, but who the government calls on as last resort, whether to manage national vaccine distribution or mitigate the fallout from mismanaged long-term care facilities during the pandemic. Ergo, people are the CAF's most important and underappreciated capability and should be treated as such. Talent has to be recruited, trained, and retained. To this effect, the first two pillars of the new CAF journey are not just the most pressing for the organization, aptly, they are also the subject of National Defense's current study: renew personnel generation and modernize the employment model. As of February 22, the CAF is 7,600 members short of its authorized strength. But due to imbalances in the training system, it is actually 10,000 people short in the operational force. The CAF is currently operating at about 85% operational force size on current mandates and roles. The organization is especially short on master corporate. This experience gap is having and will have cascading effects for years to come. As a result, stabilization and recovery of military personnel are a top priority. Generate bespoke personnel for 100 endangered occupational functions and leadership positions, especially to meet the requirements of the Navy, as well as across the cyber, space, and information domains. Reduce early service attrition, as well as differentiated unhealthy attrition at the end of initial engagements. That is, after a member's first or second term of service due to discrimination, harassment, misconduct, or sexual misconduct, while setting conditions to develop and build future force capability. To this effect, I offer the following observations for MPs as stakeholders in what General Brody calls the modern mobilization mindset and movement to regenerate the CAF and ensure the operational readiness of a vital and venerable national institution, an instrument of foreign policy and national power. One, expand the CAF and public service talent pool. This isn't mass recruitment. It's about a targeted approach to interest the right people in the right occupation. Recruiting is a whole of government and a whole of nation effort. Every riding and every member of parliament has a key role to play in building trust in the credibility of the CAF and raising awareness of the CAF as an employer of choice, especially among women, diverse ethnocultural groups, immigrant communities, and indigenous peoples. Make the defense team more agile by reducing and streamlining HR processes and policies, hundreds of them. So onerous processes are partially responsible for the prevailing staff shortages across the defense team. Without more money and more staff, modernizing the rules and processes to make recruitment and retention more feasible, more affordable, and putting in place the ministerial authorities to execute is existential to reconstitute the CAF, in particular stabilization and recovery of personnel capability. To this end, the CAF needs to modernize hundreds of policies related to recruitment and retention that are out of date. That requires priority attention by central agencies. National Defense, the Standing Committee on National Defense must ensure that Treasury Board, and in particular its president, make policy renewal for DND and the CAF a top priority. Bureaucratic or political delays will further imperil the ability of the CAF to operate. And three, MPs can enhance Pillar 3 of the CAF journey, support military families by ensuring that they are actively invested in minimizing stressors on CAF families through effective and efficient intergovernmental cooperation, coordination, and collaboration among federal, provincial, territorial, and local authorities in areas such as access to healthcare, education, and childcare. Merci.
Ms. Winger.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. The Union of National Defence Employees of the Public Service Alliance of Canada represents 20,000 civilian defence workers. Our members ensure that the military operations are mission ready at all times and that military members have safe and secure places to live and work. Our members are experts who work on bases and offices, warehouses, airports, labs, and garages. They provide consistent and knowledgeable services so that the military can be agile and combat ready. Privatization, contracting out, sexual misconduct, harassment, and discrimination undermine our members' work and occupational satisfaction. Our 2020 report highlighted the dangers of contracting out cleaning services. It showed that the budget allocation restraints force base commanders to regularly contract out essential work, costing more and providing poorer service. For example, this is a quote from a D&D briefing note in Kingston. It was observed that in an effort to increase the profit margin, the contract cleaners were using inferior and improper cleaning products, which resulted in additional maintenance, environmental problems, and health and safety issues resulting in unfit living conditions. The statement of work for the contract with Dexterra at Kingston has a total value of just over $3 million over 6 years. That's less than half of what's necessary to pay the workers even a minimum wage. It's a clear indication that the service will be compromised. Our report also detailed the situation of a contracted minimum wage worker who cleaned a D&D medical center. During most of her employment, she didn't have the necessary WMIS training and didn't understand how the chemicals she used could hurt herself or others. She was instructed to water down cleaning solutions and forced to clean secure areas without the proper security clearance. It wasn't her fault, but her work compromised the patients and other workers. She eventually quit for better work, pay, and benefits, offered at a fast food outlet. D&D must stop contracting out and repatriate existing contracted out services. There must be transparent and comprehensive reasons if contracting out must be used on rare occasions. But harassment within D&D is systemic and entrenched, and it's not limited to members of the military. One of our members, Christina McLean, experienced constant sexual and racial harassment, and she filed numerous grievances and complaints. She won, and as a result, was forced to endure even more harassment. According to McLean, managers are afraid to acknowledge anything out of line because they fear not getting promoted. They make problems go away, and they try to make her go away. The culture in fire halls is another example of toxicity. CFB Valcartier firefighters filed 9 violence in the workplace complaints, 8 of which were founded. Firefighters at CFB Suffield have accused the deputy fire chief of violent behavior while the fire chief stood idly by. Complaints dating back to 2019 have yet to be resolved. Our union is working with the investigation into sexual misconduct and workplace conducted by former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour. We commend Minister Anand for her apology and support her acceptance of Madame Arbour's initial recommendation that all such incidences be investigated and prosecuted in the civilian justice system. Now, D&D needs to expedite the current active investigations. It needs to enforce harassment policies and ensure those committing abuses face consequences. And it must include civilian workers in all aspects of any review of the current systems. And when it comes to occupational satisfaction, wage gaps are a major issue. D&D's operational workers are paid less than their equivalent trades in the private sector. D&D firefighters, for example, are paid approximately 20% less than their equivalent municipal firefighters. And yet D&D firefighters are responsible for a much wider range of safety and security duties, more than what is normal for a first-class municipal firefighter. And they're not eligible for the early retirement that's available to nearly every other firefighter in every other jurisdiction. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
5 minutes, Ms. Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here to the witnesses. Professor Luprecht, you talked about expanding the CAF talent pool, getting the right people in the right positions. Do you think universality of service should still be a criteria if you're talking about specialized positions, say in IT, for instance?
So in the kinetic domain, universality of service will remain, I think, indispensable because it's you'll run into morale issues if some people get deployed and some others don't. But I think there are, for instance, you mentioned IT. So IT is a particular challenge because we now have a cyber trade on the uniform side, but we don't have an equivalent cyber trade on the civilian side. And so the department is engaged in workarounds, but we need that civilian trade because it's a way of bringing in people with these qualifications who don't necessarily want to be in uniform. There's certain tasks only people in uniform can do, but one way to compensate for some of the shortfalls is to have greater agility in creating sort of equivalent trades on the civilian side, and then also providing more lateral movement so that people can move from other departments into those trades and out again, as well as from the private sector into the department and out again. And those are areas where we're simply not particularly agile.
Thank you. Draws people to the Canadian Forces as recruits?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
What do you think draws people to the Canadian Forces as recruits? What attracts them to sign up?
So I think the Canadian Armed Forces are an employer of choice, and the numbers would suggest that. There's about 35, any given year, there's about 35 to 65,000 people who come through the door, and about 5,000 of those end up getting hired. So I would say that the organization has good standing with the public. And there's a broad range of reasons why people will join. The key is to ensure that I think in particular members from underrepresented groups are that the organization is broadly representative of the society that it serves. And we know the Canadian Armed Forces have made inroads, in particular with visible minority groups, as well as with Indigenous peoples. But there are, if you look at the most recent analytics, very significant challenges in the attractiveness of the organization to women.
During the Afghan war, we seem to have great success in recruiting young Canadians then. What do you think motivated that?
The Canadian Armed Forces are, I think, a foreign policy tool, possibly the government's most important foreign policy tool. I'm not sure that's widely understood by Canadians or even on the Hill. And I think what we saw during Afghanistan was attention by the government to the Canadian Armed Forces as an instrument of policy and as an instrument of national power. And we saw a government that stood behind its Canadian Armed Forces and made the Canadian Armed Forces a policy priority. And I think inherently, when people look at what employer they're going to join, they want to join an employer that has the backing of the government of the day. And so I think it is key that defense be a top policy priority at any given time, irregardless of the political stripe of the government, in the Prime Minister's office and in cabinet. And I'm not sure that that's reflected to Canadians at times in government policy.
Why, well, I don't really want to ask a question why. What I want to ask is, what do you think could be done by the CAF and National Defence? What more could be done to attract women, Aboriginals, LGBTQ plus members, and people from ethnic minorities? What can they do to reach out better?
We need a very targeted recruitment and relationship building mechanism. And we have a challenge with the forces aren't very present in those areas where there's the greatest demographic growth and the greatest representation, both in general of the Canadian Armed Forces recruit pool, as well as of those underrepresented groups, in part because we don't have bases in most major urban areas in Canada. And so having a much more targeted approach, having a much more systematic and long-standing relationship building approach, and the important role that the reserves play in familiarizing Canadians with, and that recruit pool in particular, with the organization and the prospects that organization offers, because most Canadians, I think, have complete unfamiliarity with working for the federal government, let alone working for the Canadian Armed Forces, because if you live in Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal, it's highly improbable you've ever met anyone who works for the federal government, let alone anyone who wears the uniform.
Thank you, Ms. Finley. Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank both of our witnesses for being here and for your expert testimony. Professor, I'm really pleased that you're back on this study, because you added a great deal to the last study that we just finished up. And I want to touch on universality of service, and I know that my colleague, Ms. Findley, touched on it as well. But you used a term, modernize the model. I'm just going to read here from the Defense Administrative Orders and Directives. Now, I think modernizing the model is one of the ways out of this recruiting issue that we have. And I just thought, so, quote, the principle of universality of service holds that CAF members are liable to perform general military duties and common defense and security duties, not just the duties of their military occupation or occupational specification. This may include, but is not limited to, the requirement to be physically fit, employable, and deployable for general operational duties. What challenges does this create for recruitment and retention, Professor?
So one of the problems that the organization had is it didn't even know exactly what its shortfalls were or how to remedy them. So it now has the analytics capability where it knows exactly where its people are and what is required. and these are very distinct challenges: the recruitment challenge and the retention challenge. And you'll see in the new CAF journey that these are pillars 1 and pillar 2, and they're pillars 1 and 2 for good reason, because the entire rest of the organization hinges on them, and they're the most critical, the component that is currently at single greatest risk. And I would say the greatest challenge has been that government has for 20 years focused on operations and pushing out the Canadian Armed Forces on operations without allowing the organization is too small to be able to do major operations, major maintenance and sustainment, and major regeneration at the same time. And so government has had it focus on operations, and it has not invested in regeneration, and it has not invested or paid attention to maintenance and sustainment. And I would plead with you as a committee, that's where the eyes need to be in terms of on the ball, because there's now such a critical shortage, as I laid out for you, of some key personnel, that you are now genuinely endangering the ability of this organization to respond to the requests of government when called upon in critical and complex operations.
Professor, during your opening remarks, I was going to ask you about resistance to change. And our society has a resistance to change, and you use the term morale issues. So were you speaking to the fact that if we were to remove stipulation on physical fitness or different aspects of universality of service? Talk about that a little bit, about how that resistance to change is a real thing and how that might impact recruitment and retention as well.
Look, the military likes to say that soldiers aren't born, they're made. And I think in many ways, this applies, of course, also to the modern Canadian Armed Forces. It might apply more so, because if the organization needs to train, generate la formation, as they say in French, the individuals that they need. And that takes a long time. I mean, a fully trained officer can take you up to 7 years, sometimes longer, depending on the particular trade. And then you need that experience. And I think what people often don't understand is, well, you can sort of impoverish the organization, but you need the people who have kinetic experience, deployment experience abroad, for instance, to be able to surge on very short capacity to deliver on vaccines, on long-term care homes, whatever the government might ask the Canadian Armed Forces to do. And so I think the capacity exists within the organization to take individuals who want to be part of the organization, but for instance, don't have the fitness, don't have the math scores, whatever it might be. The problem is it hasn't been able to focus enough attention and resources on those individuals, because it has had to draw everybody it possibly can on the operational side. So it's all doable, but it's a matter of how do you allocate the extremely scarce resources that exist within the organization, especially on the human side, where that junior officer side that does so much of the heavy lifting, both on the operation side as well as on the instruction and the training side.
Mr. Fisher, Madame Normandy, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you to both witnesses for being here. I would begin with you, Professor Luprecht. And on this issue of universality, we know that in the future what might happen is we'll need more CAF services to respond to climate emergencies. We've seen this for COVID, we've seen it with floodings and forest fires. Would it be relevant to study the idea of implementing a paramilitary organization or type of militia dedicated to this type of emergency response? And this might interest people who don't want to do any combat, and this might increase recruitment. Should we look at this possibility? That's an excellent question. There's a study that I actually did on this. And so there are 4 options. There's the American option, type of FEMA. It's a huge bureaucracy. It's very expensive, and it's a very slow organization. It might be appropriate for the U.S., but there are many reasons why other allies have not adopted the FEMA model. You can also look at organizations that provide state emergency services, such as what we find in Australia or in many of the European countries. Over the medium term, we could set up an organization, this type of organization in Canada, but over the short term, that infrastructure does not exist. I've been arguing for years that this is crucial because right now we have the luxury that when we've had to call upon the armed forces for national deployment, they were available. But imagine if there was a huge international crisis where our CAF forces are needed in order to protect our allies, our countries, and the continent, and there are no available resources. So it's crucial. It's crucial that these type of organizations be created and that they be able to provide a labor force or volunteer services even. Third option is that which we adopted, more resources for the Red Cross and expertise for the Red Cross, but that has a limit because the Red Cross has limited specialized staff, and we need a broader amount of specializations. The Red Cross does not have this in order to respond to the types of disasters that you've spoken about. The fourth option that I prefer is to create a dedicated unit within CAF of about 2,000 people, and that they be dedicated to national deployment. And so they would deal with the types of issues that you've spoken of. And if they're not required for national deployment, this dedicated unit would be able to assist in the development of Indigenous communities in the Great North. They will have the ability to contribute. So this dedicated unit would be able to improve our capacity to respond to national emergencies and would be able to complement community development efforts in the North, where we really need resources, human resources, that can only really be provided by CAF. Thank you. I'd be very interested in reading any documents that you would send. As for limited resource on an operational level, I understand that we've redirected forces for recruiting towards operational issues. Was this a mistake? Because over the long term, this deprives us of recruits. So should we change things? Should we put the forces that we've directed towards operational elsewhere? Answer: I would say that right now, CAF is really focused on regenerating the Canadian Armed Forces. This is a huge effort. The issue is that because there is a staffing shortage, there are always other aspects of the Canadian Armed Forces that are neglected, when we always have to be concentrating on one aspect or another. I would say that regeneration, well, right now I would say that we're at a crucial point where the organization might break if we don't succeed. One of the issues is that we've not had a sufficient amount of resources. We've not had enough human resources, but also the procedures in place are so onerous, are so complex. To hire someone in CAF, it takes about, on average, 200 days. So how can we be competitive even with a very well-qualified candidate who wants to work, but you cannot expect people to pay their rent for 200 days. They're going to take another job. And a large part of these processes are processes that have to be updated, but on the other hand, they are policies that are imposed by the government. And
fortunately, Madame Nomi, and I just take note of that study you referenced, Professor Leprecht. In the event that you've not already submitted it at some previous point in your appearances before this committee, I'm sure we'd appreciate it. So thank you for that. 5 minutes, Madame Matheson.
Thank you so much. Ms. Winger, I would like to ask you, you spoke a lot about that outsourcing of work on base. And you gave one example, actually a couple examples, one about the unfit living conditions because of poor cleaning, one in terms of the medical facility. Can you provide more examples or expand on that, how that privatization has impacted specifically the health and safety of workers within DND and the CAF?
Thank you for the question. Certainly I can. I can give an example from when the pandemic was first called in. I can tell you that the Department of National Defense worked really hard at making sure that all the employees and all the military members were safe. We worked really well together. There was a great deal of consultation, and we put in all the processes we needed to make sure that safety was the number one priority. But it wasn't the same for those employees who were contractors. I can tell you of contracted employees at a particular base where they were being told that they still had to continue to come into the workplace. They still had to continue to do different duties that weren't their regular duties because they were no longer required due to the lower manning that was happening as a result of the pandemic. And they weren't given any of the safety gear. So these employees, these contractors were putting their lives at risk, and they were literally putting the employees of national defense and the military members' lives at risk as well, because they were acting almost as a conduit. If one of them were infected with the virus, they would have easily been spreading it at that point. And we had to work very hard with national defense and with the contractors to try to get that addressed. And in most cases, we were successful, but in a couple we weren't. And we're just very lucky that we didn't see any catastrophic results from that.
And of course, that would impact morale amongst troops, amongst workers. Can you talk about how that impacts retention as we are going forward in this study?
Certainly, that sent a very strong signal to the colleagues. When we're at National Defense, we do have a family feeling. We do feel that we have a tight knit group that we work amongst each other. And whether we are contractors or military members, we are all on the same team and working together. But it was very obvious when we were seeing that one group were treated so very poorly as opposed to the others. And that was hard on everybody, not just the contractors, but it was hard on those employees, because people didn't want to go into a position where they would be calling out the contractors and telling them that they shouldn't be there. They didn't want to be putting in complaints, but their failure to do so was risking their own health.
And the increase in terms of outsourcing and that privatization side, that's increased quite significantly. Can you explain specifically why? I think you touched on it in terms of the changes on budgets and how bases are run, but could you explain that a bit more?
Right. So we have our salary wage envelopes at National Defense, and that is money that the department's given just to maintain their public servants. However, they also have the money for the operations and maintenance budget, and they have often more money in there. And what's easy for them then is to just contract out work where they have this other pile of money, rather than going after increasing the SWE to an appropriate level of what they need. And so then you end up in situations, just like the previous speaker was commenting on, where you have these massive shortfalls at the workplace, and then you become very reliant on contractors to be able to pick up that work that needs to be done. And that doesn't always work. In fact, that rarely ever works, and it certainly is not the most cost-effective way of doing it. We usually end up having to pay more money. We're not getting the services that we need, and certainly not when we do need them.
Ms. Matheson, if I may, I'm currently on a hiring committee for a professor at RMC. At a civilian university, this takes 3 months. At RMC, it takes us 18 months from flash to bang to hire a new professor, 6 times as long.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, thank you. Flashbang hiring, yes. Mr. Motz, 4 minutes, second round.
Thank you, Chair. Flashbangs was the term we use in the TAC team, and I don't want to go back to those sounds and sights. So anyway, Mr. Lusbrecht, Professor Lusbrecht, you mentioned something in your opening remarks about, you called it the missing middle. You explained that we need to fix it quickly. How do we fix it quickly? And can you expand on the danger that poses to our military readiness to protect our country because of that missing middle?
Well, this is sort of your junior leadership and management cadre that ultimately needs to bring your organization along. But that's the cadre that you're relying on to make operations happen, to do a lot of that sustainment and maintenance, and that's heavily engaged in the regeneration component of the force. And so because the shortages, it means that there's all the more pressure and tax on those individuals who stay. So you can see how this sort of becomes a particular challenge, because individuals, in addition to all the other challenges that come with serving in the CAF, family challenges and so forth, you now have exceptional pressure on that missing middle. So how do you protect that missing middle? How do you move those individuals along? And how do you make sure that as we come back behind, we have a systematic strategy to backfill for that missing middle? Because the way we got ourselves there is because precisely we didn't have the resources, the time, the capabilities to focus on regeneration, because we used that missing middle to focus disproportionately on making sure we deliver on Government of Canada operations that works for a short period of time, but after a while, you wear out the organization to where we are now. And as a result of the pandemic, you don't have recruitment shortfalls per se. What you have is training shortfalls, because the organization 2021 was only able to bring in about half the people that it normally would, not for lack of interest, but for lack of incapacity to actually be able to get these people through the recruitment and through the training system. So
thank you.
Has added to the challenges.
Thank you for that, Professor. I do also want to comment. I certainly agree with the need to rethink how we deploy our Canadian Forces personnel. They're not. When I talk to young people in my riding and people who are interested in the military, the last thing that they find attractive in the Canadian military is the need for the, over focus on the domestic emergencies that the armed forces currently are looking at. So I do appreciate some of your thoughts. So if you were in charge, Professor, and if there's the most important thing, the one thing that you would consider and recommend to this committee that would be impactful on increasing recruitment and retention, where would that go? Where would you go with that?
Luckily, Mr. Motz, I'm a prof, so nobody will ever put me in charge of anything. I just get to think about the organization. But look, I think I have all the admiration in the world for the many people who are really trying to make this work. But I do think it takes far too long to get people into our system, and it takes too long to get people through the training system. And this is sort of where Ms. Winger's comments are really important, because what we forget is if you want to train people, you actually need to have facilities that are appropriate for that. And many of these facilities, I mean, if you look at DND, hundreds of buildings, thousands of kilometers of roads, the 50-year-old culverts in Gagetown that were washed out in 15, 16, I have it in my testimony from last week, that basically imperiled training operations in Gagetown for over a year. And you need those cooks. You need exactly the people who are part of Madame Winger's organization. You need the bus drivers to ferry people from their dorms to the training operations. And that's where we're having critical shortages of people within the training system.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Madame Lambropoulos, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses for being here to answer some of our questions today. Mr. Luprecht, you mentioned that a lot of the recruitment and retention policies that are put in place are very out of date. I was wondering if you can be a little bit more specific as to which ones need to go, and also whether or not you know of any systems outside of Canada that have good recruitment and retention systems that we should maybe look to during the study.
So I would say it's less about which policies per se need to go, but the ability to actually. So if you're putting people in the training system, it means those people aren't there to modernize your policies. So that's right. So part of this is a staffing issue. There's only so many people to go around to do this, and then there's literally I'm happy to provide some more details to the committee afterwards. But there's literally hundreds of policies that need to be updated, not because the organization doesn't want to update them, but because it doesn't have the staff to do that. And then when you update them, it takes months or years to percolate through the system, through the central agencies. This is why I was saying one of the things that this committee needs to urge Treasury Board to do, and the president of Treasury Board, that when a D&D policy submission comes to them, it must receive priority treatment. It can't take weeks or months to percolate to the system, because that further imperils the system. Different countries have different employment sort of conditions, so I think it's not that easy to compare to other countries. But you might look, for instance, at a country such as Sweden that has recently scaled up pretty substantially on reconstituting its force. That was already before Russian revisionism in Ukraine. So I think in a country that has, I think we need to look at countries that have similar values, similar sort of objectives as our own. And I would say, for instance, the Netherlands are a country that frequently gets lost sort of in the shovel and conversation. And I think if you also look at Australia, a country that has consistently spent 2%, is about 2/3 of our population and 2/3 of our economy. But because of the security environment that Australia has to live in, half the world's population within 500 miles of its coast has paid very much has paid much closer attention to these issues.
If you can also comment a little bit on whether or not you believe that PRs should be given a little bit more flexibility. I know under certain conditions they're able to apply for the armed forces, but generally speaking, it's reserved for Canadian citizens. Do you think that if Canada were to open it a little bit more and allow more PRs to join, we would have less of an issue, a little bit more interest in, or at least a better time attracting more people?
There are certainly countries that use permanent residency conditions as an expedited mechanism to obtain citizenship. And I think as long as that doesn't compromise our ability to obtain proper security clearances and do proper sort of resilience assessments on the individuals who join, I would certainly favor a system where people who demonstrate their loyalty to this country through service to the Canadian Armed Forces have an expedited route to Canadian citizenship.
I'm not sure how much time I have left, Mr. Chair.
You have, your cat has 19 seconds, but you're out of time.
All right, well, thank you very much,
yeah.
Mr. Luper.
Madame Normandine, a minute, please.
Ma question cette fois-ci se répond.
Thank you. My question is from Mrs. Winger. We had a witness this week mentioned that people leaving the armed forces are oftentimes prioritizing the paramilitary and the public, and they bring the toxic military culture with them. And I'd like to know if you have seen the same phenomenon, and if you think that fighting against toxic work environments in the CAF will have a positive impact on defense and paramilitary and the public service.
Well, thank you for the question. That's a very interesting question that you raise, and it's a very complex situation. Obviously, it's nearly impossible to be able to train out a toxic work environment. You can't put people who have these behaviors and these ideas and give them training and go see the light and change their ways. These are typically embedded characteristics of people. And so when whatever happens that causes them to leave the military, if they have these characteristics, they do often end up getting preference for public service positions. And National Defense is a big supporter of hiring ex-military members, and so they should be. But the challenge is those that have those ideologies are then coming in, and it's almost as though they're in a hidden uniform because they're showing up. They still have these beliefs, and they're coming into an environment where they are quite comfortable, where they're familiar with things. They have a support of current serving military members. You see that they tend to support one another when they're at the workplace. Of course, there's a hierarchy within that.
Ms. Winger, we're going to have to leave the question there only because it's a very complicated question, as you rightly said. And possibly you can work it into a response to another question. Ms. Masson, a minute, please.
Ms. Winger, I wanted to ask, how does that privatization you were talking about before, the contracting out, impact transparency of work, national security of the work that your members do?
Again, that's a very difficult question, because how does it impact the security of the work? Well, there's a great deal of challenges, and we are reliant on our contractors to be following the rules, but the contractors don't have the same goals that national defense employees have. National defense employees want to make national defense work. They want to have the operation be successful. They want to serve Canadians. Contractors want to make money. That's what their goal is. They want to, create profit sharing for their shareholders. They want to increase, revenue for the owners. That is what their goal is. So when you have these two compromising goals, it doesn't necessarily work. And so you end up having corners get cut. Just as I was using the example at the D&D Medical Center, you have employees that are cutting the chemicals so that you don't have the appropriate cleansers going on in there. You don't have the knowledge going into the training that happens with it. And we see that time and time again.
Sorry, Ms. Winger, I seem to have the task of interrupting you. It's because my colleagues ask complicated questions and ask you to answer it in 30 seconds, so it's all their fault. Mr. Schmale, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the testimony today by the witnesses. I'm not a regular member of the committee, so I do apologize if some of these questions have been asked before. Question first to the professor, if I could. Are you aware, do you know of any impacts the mandatory vaccination policy has had on recruitment and retention within the Canadian Armed Forces?
To the best that I'm aware of, with the numbers that are available, you'd need to check with military personnel generation, but that the policy has not had an impact on recruitment. It appears that interest propensity is as it was before, and the impact it had on attrition was relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, and I think manageable for the organization. I think this is really a question about you need an organization that is resilient, because if you have large components of the organization not being operable, then you can't perform for Canadians. So I think that's really what the vaccination issue is about.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I guess in your view, kind of switching gears a bit here, could change positively in the military culture happen without erasing the military or naval or even warrior ethos?
Well, I think you're already seeing significant changes. I think you'll soon see the new Profession of Arms manual being released, Trusted to Serve. You'll see the Canadian Armed Forces journey. There's the new health and wellness strategy. So I think the vast majority of women, men, and diverse members of the Canadian Armed Forces are dedicated to cultural change and to sustaining that cultural change. It is a matter of making sure we have policies that actually can actually be operationalized and can actually be realized, and that are developed in consultation with stakeholders and experts rather than just from the top down.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Not too long ago, I guess, according to these numbers I have in front of me, 20% or more of Canadian forces, regular force, used to be recruited from Atlantic Canada. Is that number still relatively the same, around the 20% of members in the CAF? I'll let you answer that first before I get to my second one.
You would need to ask, I'd be able to obtain those numbers for you. I don't have those numbers with me. The military personnel generation has those numbers, but of course, systematically, that's a challenge for the organization because there's significant demographic decline in Atlantic Canada, and of course, demographic challenges also within Quebec, which poses a whole separate conversation in terms of challenges around sustaining bilingualism within the federal government and the Canadian Armed Forces.
How much time do I have, Chair? A minute? Okay. Perfect. I guess I'll stay with the professor if I could, I guess. You had talked about it a bit earlier on in your questions and your comments as well as your opening statement, but can you just maybe expand on, if you have one or maybe the most important change or recommendation you have to this committee that would be impactful in increasing recruitment?
I think understand what the requirements are to be able to deliver for the government's expectations. I believe we don't currently have the right balance between accountability, transparency, process on the one hand, and politicians who keep on saying they will deliver for the military. They will deliver the people, they will deliver the kit. And I don't think we can have politicians making those promises when they know full well that the processes and the bureaucracies simply aren't aligned to deliver that. I'll give you one example, sonar operators. So we're building all these fantastically expensive ships. Well, if we don't actually have the expertise to staff those ships, those are going to be sitting around in dock. And with F-35s, we have a significant challenge around pilots. I think these are all very attractive operations of occupations. The problem is most Canadians have never even heard of them, what a sonar operator is, let alone what this individual might do and how they are critical to the operation of a ship. And I think that's where we all have a significant role to play in socializing Canadians and familiarizing them with the Canadian Armed Forces as an employer of choice.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale, and welcome to the committee, by the way. Mr. Spingman, final 4 minutes.
Chair, thank you very much. Professor Leuplecht, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being with us. At the outset, I wanted to ask you about your appointment. I think it's a fairly new appointment to the board of the German Institute for Defense and Strategic Studies, and take advantage of your presence and ask you if there's anything that we can borrow from the German experience, good, bad, or ugly. Sometimes having the same problems appear in a different jurisdiction just sort of underscores how important they are here, but potentially also positive things and maybe even very recent things with respect to the war in Ukraine. Any light that the German experience with respect to the talent pool, as you say, but also the HR processes could shed on our scenario?
Well, certainly on the equipment side, I mean, one of my German friends likes to say that the Germans have boats that don't float, they have planes that don't fly, and they have tanks that don't roll anywhere. And so I would say that we have some rather similar problems on the equipment side. And interestingly, similar sort of challenges on the staffing side, but the German organization, the German staffing organization is much more agile than the Canadian one, in part because much of the German Bundeswehr runs on a defense agency rather than a civil service employment model. And so it runs on different types of contracts. And so that has meant, even in a society that is very similar to Canada with unfamiliarity and perhaps even some hostility towards the military, that they have been able to sustain their numbers. But the German military is also facing significant staffing challenges. And I think there's obviously a lot to be done here in terms of comparative work on what is working in comparable jurisdictions.
That's very interesting, and thank you for that, Professor. On the HR policy side, I mean, one way to slice this would be to sort of say, okay, let's take a look at some private sector and public organizations that do HR extremely well, that have high retention rates, that have excellent recruitment processes, and that get the people they want quickly enough, and then line those up against the HR policies of the Canadian Forces and figure out which obstacles there are structurally in the Canadian Forces by virtue of, as we discussed, universality of service and other military-related policies that cannot be eliminated, but which ones could potentially go. To your knowledge, has any of that been done? Have any third-party management consulting firms been retained to take a look at this, or might this be one pathway to broach some of these questions that you mentioned in your introduction?
Mr. Spengler, that's a great question, but actually I'm not sure that the Canadian Armed Forces need more consultants to tell them what problems they have and what challenges they have, because they know full well what those challenges are. What they don't currently have is the internal civilian and military staffing to be able to address all of these challenges. And so what the Canadian Armed Forces needs more desperately than consultants is a 15-year sustained commitment by all parties in this House to regenerating, sustaining, and operating this organization. And I think to this effect, I would urge all parties to work together on multi-party votes on key defense decisions and on committing to a joint pathway forward for the Canadian Armed Forces. It is similar to a private sector organization in the sense that if you keep on sort of changing pathways, or if you don't pay attention, as some might argue has been sort of the challenge also for the organization, you're bound to run into trouble. And now that we're in trouble, we really do need sustained attention, because we are genuinely, Mr. Spengman, embarrassing ourselves with our allies.
No, understood. Let me take the 30 seconds that I have to ask you this then. Is there a white paper, is there a policy paper that zooms in on the very specific HR questions that you've mentioned, and are there marching orders? Because I don't think it's clear to the committee necessarily that those marching orders exist in a figurative sense, that the armed forces could actually work on to change these HR policies. Is that available? And if so, could you provide that to the committee?
Very briefly.
I can provide some material to the committee. I would encourage you to engage Brigadier Brody, Major General Bernard, as well as the military personnel generation hierarchy, because those are the people who are ultimately responsible for the entire HR system. And I think these are people who are doing yeoman's work here, but who could certainly benefit from this sort of attention that you are heaping on these policies, because they are ultimately in charge of making these components work for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Mr. Svengeman, and that ends our first hour. And I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank Professor Liebrecht and Ms. Winger for their contribution to this study. As always, excellent observations, and I just reiterate the point that you raised, Professor Liebrecht, about the study reference with Ms. Normandine's question. And if that could be made available, that would be appreciated. With that, we're going to suspend and re-impanel. We have to bring in the witnesses. So thank you again. Clerk, I have to make the observation that you have an unhealthy fascination with ice cream. My goodness. We'll bring this meeting back to order. We have as our second panel the National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman Gregory Lick. Welcome, sir. And Robin Hines, Director General Operations. Welcome, Ms. Hines. I'll just ask you for your opening 5-minute statements, and I'll start with you, Mr. Lick.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I want to thank the committee for inviting me here today to discuss recruitment and retention in the Canadian Armed Forces. I am joined by, as we said, by Robin Hines, my Director General of Operations, and we are pleased to be with you over the next hour to provide you some sense of those issues based on the evidence we have found. Well, this is my first appearance before this committee in the 44th Parliament. I have already had the pleasure of meeting many members of this committee in person, one-on-one, and I look forward to meeting the remaining members in the near future. As you have likely already heard, the issues surrounding recruitment and retention have many factors affecting them. Du point de vue d'un recrutement, différentes raisons.
From a recruitment perspective, there are a number of reasons why individuals choose or choose not to join the Canadian Armed Forces. There are also a number of reasons why the Canadian Armed Forces cannot connect with and recruit certain Canadians into their ranks. Additionally, aside from medical release or release for disciplinary purposes, an individual member of the Canadian Armed Forces may leave the forces for any number of reasons. But when you group these reasons together, patterns begin to emerge, and issues of a systemic nature begin to reveal themselves. Over the last 23 years of this office's existence, we followed these issues closely and have made recommendations to the Canadian Armed Forces on how they can address these issues moving forward.
The themes that we are currently examining and plan to examine in the near future that directly affect recruitment and retention. Last June, I held a press conference addressing the ongoing issues surrounding misconduct in the military and the department. During that press conference, I stated that the Canadian Forces grievance system is broken. I will hold that position until I see that there is a long-term solution to what are clearly some deep issues that revive the long delays every time after a quick fix to address the backlog. As I've told many of you, our office is in a unique position to make this determination. We are sometimes called an office of last resort. This means we typically refer people back into the grievance system until those mechanisms have been exhausted, or unless there are compelling circumstances. What I can say firmly is that we are intervening in more cases earlier in the grievance process, and this is a troubling trend. The grievance system is the principal recourse mechanism that a Canadian Armed Forces member has to address unfairness or seek resolution to a variety of situations. However, members can face significant delays in the grievance process. For some, these delays can lead to financial hardship, physical and emotional stress, relationship breakdown, and worse. Recently, I've had to involve myself in 2 grievance files, one that was over 9 years and another over 4 years. My office has since received a response to our query related to all grievances that are delayed, broken down by grievance type and length of delay. This response provides a clear picture of the number problem, but it does not reveal the reality of why this is occurring. As I stated to the Chief of Defence Staff in 2 letters sent in late 2021, I strongly believe that the fix to the grievance system is both people and process. Unfortunately, many of the fixes we have seen thrown at the system over the decades have only provided a surge capacity of people to bring down the backlog. The underlying problems in the grievance system are daunting, but failure to act on them in a meaningful way will only continue to erode trust in the system. Like many before them, many more CAF members with promising careers ahead of them will walk out the door as a result of inaction. It is discouraging that some of the issues we continue to identify with the chain of command were raised by the first ombudsman between 1998 and 2005. The cycle continues. Les simples commentaires comme s'attaquer au fait.
Simple fixes, such as addressing the fact that the Chief of Defence Staff has very limited financial authority to address an unfairness for a CAF member, makes absolutely no sense. From a retention perspective, any prospective member of the Canadian Armed Forces should know that if they face an issue during their time in uniform, that there is a system in place that works. Currently, that cannot be guaranteed. And this will have an impact on keeping people in the armed forces.
Trust. We also need to ensure we are making the institution stronger by guaranteeing the independence of its arm-length bodies. The Sexual Misconduct Response Center, SMRC, our office, and other military and civilian authorities need to be protected against the possibilities of outside influence and even the perception of it. Without additional measures put in place to solidify this independence, trust will continue to erode. On a second theme, we are all aware of the culture crisis that the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence now suffer. Stories about misconduct continue to drive the news cycles. As a result, we know that talented, well-trained people have left the Canadian Armed Forces because they were directly affected by these stories or as a result of how the military responded to them. Though difficult to measure, this has likely impacted recruitment as well. The overall culture in the military, including its initiatives to promote inclusion and diversity within its ranks, continues to suffer. Though we have seen promising organizational changes, such as the standing up of the Chief Professional Conduct and Culture, we are far from seeing the results of anything that would constitute substantial change on the horizon.
Mr. Lick, Ombudsman Lick, we're well over the 5 minutes for your statement. I wonder if you could wind it up and then we can get to questions with members.
Okay, very good.
Please, thank you.
So I think I'll just focus then on the last theme. Family matters. The government's defense policy, strong, secure, and engaged, places its commitment to its people. There are still major challenges facing members of the defense community on the home front. So overall, I've heard good reports about those transitioning to civilian life in the new process of transition. However, our office continues to intervene in cases where a member is days or not hours from release and lacking appropriate preparation. So just in conclusion, we need a system in which people trust that they'll be treated fairly. We need a culture of respect for every individual within the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. And we need support for our families because they are the backbone of the members that serve us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I see Mr. May.
Yes, sorry for the interruption, Mr. Chair. During the introduction, the English translation that was coming through came through at the same volume, which made it very difficult to hear. Hopefully we can fix that moving forward.
It appears to have been something to do with the witness selecting a particular button on the particular console, which is now apparently fixed. So I hope it's working now, but thank you. Colleagues, since there's only one presentation of 5 minutes, I think we can go to a 6-minute round, starting with Ms. Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Ombudsman. Good to see you again. I'm obviously, I think, concerned about what you're saying about the grievance system when you talk about something that's taken 9 years. Can you expound on the problems with the grievance system a little more?
Well, I think certainly the major problem with the grievance system that we are hearing from the reason, and one of the reasons that we do intervene more often and more early in some of the complaints that we do hear because of compelling circumstances are those delays. And I believe that certainly what we're hearing is that certainly there is a resource issue in not having sufficient resources in order to be able to support the grievance system. But I truly and firmly believe that there are more systemic issues underneath. One of them are people accountable for supporting the grievance system, whether that's at in the chain of command, at the initial authority level, or at the final authority level. there are deep issues in there. And one of the reasons that we have decided in our systemic investigation plan next year, the following year, is to look at these recourse mechanisms to determine what are those deep issues that is causing this cycle of delays to occur over and over again. Every time resources are thrown against it, backlog comes down, but the delays keep reoccurring. So there are some systemic issues there that we need to find out what they are.
I imagine that also would be hard on the mental health of the member and their families, because uncertainty is never good when there's an issue. DND has been sitting on a comprehensive military family strategy. Can you elaborate on that issue and what it means to military families?
Well, certainly the comprehensive military family strategy, when it came out and we were briefed on it about 3 years ago, we were very, very supportive of it. And any way that we can support our military families who are, as I said, and it's commonly termed the backbone of the military members, in order to support them while they're serving. If there's anything that we can do to be able to support them better, that is vital. The issue that we've seen with this particular strategy, it's supported in principle, but it needs to be resourced. It needs to be resourced, and it needs to be implemented, and that hasn't occurred yet.
When was it initially put forward?
I believe it was 2018, but I'll ask Robin if she has an update on that.
Yeah, thanks. So it was originally called a Comprehensive Military Family Plan, which has since kind of morphed into the Comprehensive Military Strategy as they took the initiatives from within the plan and put some implementation steps to it. And as the Ombudsman said, although the report has gained approval and endorsement from the chain of command, it is also my understanding that the resourcing has not been approved for the implementation of the strategy.
Husband often says to me, yeah.
For a second, the microphone, I'm sure, is causing the translators grief. I think it has to do with the position in the microphone, because it sounds like there's a lot of...
She just put it down.
Yeah, so we'll see whether that works.
I was going to say that, as my husband often says, a good plan in action is better than a perfect plan on the drawing board. So it seems to me 3.5, 4 years is plenty of time to get something moving. For the Ombudsman, why do you think people are leaving the military, and why are they staying, in your view?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I think there is a crisis of trust within the military in terms of are people going to be treated fairly? And that is, the core part of our mandate. When people come forward to us, they're looking for fair treatment, and we try to help them get that. The other element, though, is that the misconduct crisis that is clearly in the news and continues to be in the news is certainly causing people to lose trust that when they do come forward, if there's a situation of misconduct, whether it is sexual or some other abuse of power, they want to know that they will be treated fairly. They want to know that they will be heard to deal with that particular situation. And then I think the other one is we see, and I hear as I go around to various bases and wings from families and members who are having a difficult time being able to afford housing. We are seeing policies, as some of the other witnesses have said, policies that are outdated and not agile enough to be able to keep up with the economic factors that are not only affecting the military, but of course all Canadians with respect to housing, inflation, and so on. But some of those policies, like the post-living differential, have not been updated. The rates have not been updated since 2008. The economy and the economic situation across the country has changed. And That has created a very much a situation of unfairness for a lot of members and a lot of families across the country. So there's a whole variety of reasons why people have decided to leave, but I truly believe it comes down to kind of the basics. There's a lack of trust that the system will treat you fairly. There needs to be a change in the culture of respect and more respect for the individual. And we need to help deal with the military families and support them better in supporting our members. And I also, Seamless Canada is an initiative that is trying to help deal with that with the provinces and territories. But this is an area that I believe and strongly believe that the Prime Minister and First Ministers need to deal with quite directly.
Okay, I want to leave.
Provinces and territories.
We have to leave it there. Thank you. Ms. O'Connell, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for both being here. I want to actually pick up on that grievance process as well and kind of get into, you spoke about in some of these cases and the backlogs, but I have a question in and around, are all grievance cases treated equally? And I mean that in the sense of, are there prior types of, say, a sexual harassment grievance versus a pay grievance? Very, challenging for the individual involved, but a grievance around, say, harassment might pose an imminent physical danger as well.
Well, certainly, I would expect that if there is an imminent physical danger, that is not dealt with through the grievance process. If it is an imminent danger to an individual, that would be dealt with through the various law enforcement agencies or through the SMRC. And if we receive a complaint, and this is something that I'll ask Robin to actually speak a little bit further on, but if we receive a complaint or a call from an individual that is in imminent danger, or we feel after talking with them that they may be in imminent danger, then we will refer them to appropriate supports. That could be law enforcement, it could be the SMRC, depending on the situation. But in that particular type of thing, that's something we do. That's something that we ensure that they are. Robin, who will have a little bit more detail on in that sort of prioritization too as well.
Sure, thanks. So for any calls that we get about sexual misconduct, so as the Ombudsman mentioned, we really try to allow the person who is making the call and who has brought this issue forward to be in the driver's seat in terms of what their next step should be. So we will provide them information about a variety of different recourse mechanisms and resources available to them and allow them to kind of make that choice. We also offer the service of doing that warm handover to help ease the process in that regard. In terms of prioritization of grievances, so internally, as the Ombudsman mentioned earlier, we do have a process by which we can escalate files more quickly when there are compelling circumstances that allows us to kind of go up the chain of command at a higher level than we would normally. Internally, inside of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, there are a multitude of different recourse mechanisms and initial authorities and respondents, depending on the type of complaint that comes in, and the process that gets followed is slightly different and can be faster or slower depending on what that complaint is.
And just on that, and thank you for that, but just on that, part of the kind of terminology as I was reading the backgrounder and then listening to, there's this approach of addressing unfairnesses in the state. I get all that, and that's certainly a regular part of grievances, but there is a level of sexual misconduct that we have heard about in CAF, and this kind of, it might seem like a small thing, but to start to categorize sexual misconduct as, unfairness, that fairness needs to be restored in that regard, also downplays by categorizing some of these things in the same way. So have you given any thought to even your role in the ability to start saying a traditional, so quote unquote, and I know there's no such thing as a fully traditional grievance, but given the nature of the sexual misconduct cases and the systemic issues, is there not an opportunity to say, this is a larger issue than an unfairness piece, and that there should be a carving out or a categorization in the language as well that acknowledges what's been going on?
It's a very difficult question to answer, but I have to come back to the role of the Office of the Ombudsman. And just to reiterate that for everyone, and I've talked to a lot of you already, our role is to ensure that the processes that are available to people, whether that's misconduct, whether that's sexual misconduct, or any type of issue or grievance that they may be dealing with, or situation that they may be dealing with, our role is an oversight role to ensure that whatever process they follow, they first of all know what that process is, know how to go about it. We refer them to that process. We may help them get started. We may help them in terms of overseeing it during the process. But our role is to ensure that that process is followed fairly. They can always come back to us and say, look, there's a delay, I'm not getting answers. Well, then we may intervene with them too as well at that point in time. But our role truly as an ombudsman around the world, pretty well the same around the world, is to ensure that the processes available to people, in those processes, that they are treated fairly. And that's our role.
Okay,
thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Ombudsman. Thank you for being here, and thank you for appearing before the committee. I would like to refer you to a public statement that you made about a year ago in March 2021. You were asking the government to make your office truly independent. And I quote the way it was reported in the media, you were wanting that your office be independent, and you mentioned that the current structure at the time undermined confidence in your ability to fight for the members of CAF. I'd like to hear you speak to what, in your opinion, made your office insufficiently independent.
As I said almost a year ago, and I continue to say to various audiences, there are a number of reasons why you have an ombudsman office. First of all, we are meant to be that civilian oversight of in this case, of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, to ensure that people within the defense community are treated fairly, their complaints are heard, their complaints are dealt with. One of the issues that we saw very clearly and primarily because of the sexual misconduct issues that came forward in the various
sorry again, Ombudsman Leck, we're apparently having some difficulties with translation, are we?
Are they on the correct channel?
On the correct channels? Is Christine on the correct channel?
No, the interpreters are.
Oh, the interpreters.
Yeah. Okay, let's try again.
Okay, we'll give it a go again. Okay. So, sorry, if you could just continue with your answer then, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just do a quick test. Test 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, so where was I? So in this particular case, one of the reasons I came forward, and all of my predecessors before me have come forward to ask for greater independence, in particular reporting to Parliament. As an officer of Parliament, it is to ensure that, as I talked about with the grievance system, that there is a greater trust, that there is a completely and perceived to be completely independent organization that has oversight over in this case, the Department of National Defense and the military. And that is to ensure confidence in the system that organization is independent. We have, and over the years, we have seen interference in our office. We have seen our authorities be changed without consultation. All those elements of administrative interference and direct interference cause issues of confidence. And they also cause us some inability to carry out. One of the main reasons that I asked for that independence was to be able to escalate a particular issue, whatever it might be, beyond just the minister. The minister, whatever party, always is a member of a certain party. The issues that affect the military is a Canadian institution that is critical to all Canadians and needs to be heard by those that represent all Canadians, which is Parliament, and not have any of the filters of any particular party in power as it goes forward. In some cases, I may need to escalate that beyond Parliament and perhaps to the Prime Minister. Any particular issues that we hear, because the importance of the military as a Canadian institution for national security is vital. And those issues, whatever they might be, need to be heard by Parliament. That is the main reason that I've asked for greater independence.
Merci beaucoup. Et dans la foulée de cette question-là.
Thank you. And to follow up, you made a request to be able to report to Parliament last March. Your predecessor, Mr. Walburn, had made the same request before you. So where are we now in dealing with this request? Do you think it will be favorably received?
It's very difficult to speculate on what the government will do in that particular case. I have briefed the minister on this particular case, the same briefing that I've given a number of audiences, including in my press conference last year, and included in the position paper that I put forward at that time. The minister is very knowledgeable about governance issues as it reflects corporate governance. I think it was a good conversation, but I cannot say where at this point in time it will go. I will continue to push for it. I think it is the right thing to do. I came into this office thinking that, like every ombudsman before me, thinking that I can work within the system to be able to support the defense community in achieving fairness as much as we could. But I've seen very directly the issues that all the other ombudsmen before me have seen. And in this case, I came around to the opinion, and very strongly held now, that independence in reporting to Parliament is the right thing to do for the defense community.
Normandy, 6 minutes. Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Lick, for coming today. So you've spoken about this broken redress system quite often, and that it's undermining members of the military's belief that they can get that swift, fair review of their complaints. How many cases actually meet the complaint deadlines?
I'll ask Ms. Hines to actually respond to that. We do have the details of that, and we can forward that to the committee later on too as well. But perhaps Robin can actually respond just to summarize that particular response.
Sure. So I happen to have the grievance ones right in front of me. So in the Canadian Armed Forces, there are two levels of grievance. There's initial authority, and then there is a final authority. The initial authority grievance level has 120 days to respond. So it used to be 90 and subsequently was increased to 120. At the final authority, there are actually no timelines associated when the final authority has to make a decision. So the last numbers that I have, the grievances at initial authority, there were 566, and 307 of those were pending a decision longer than 4 months. For the final authority grievance level, and again, happy to provide these numbers afterwards, there were 687 files at final authority. Over 340 of them were waiting 1 to 4 years for a decision. 33 of them were still outstanding at 4 to 9 years.
So, I mean, that's significant. That, of course, would have a huge impact in terms of people's faith, I guess, in that system. That would get around. That would get through the forces in terms of their understanding. Okay. In the brief that you provided to this committee, you spoke about families a lot. You spoke about care, given child care, housing care, family care, parents with children with special needs, aging parents, and that's a lot of what we talk about in terms of women, that caring work falls on women. So is that the most common complaint that you hear coming forward through to your office, or what is the most common, or maybe you can give us an idea?
Yeah, certainly Robin has a lot of those details, but certainly the most common complaint we receive is around benefits. But I think I will say, though, that when I do visit the bases and wings, obviously a bit more virtually nowadays, but when I do visit them, the most passionate points that come up are from families and from members who have family issues. In particular, whether it's childcare, whether it's access to childcare, whether it's affordable childcare. I will say that there is a bit of more optimism now with respect to affordable childcare coming to everyone, but there will still continue to be some capacity issues until that catches up with everyone. But certainly those, I think the most passionate individuals are those families with special needs children or families with disabilities who have to, as they're posted from one base to another, in many cases have to go to the bottom of a wait list again. That is unconscionable. And I've had to sit in various audiences with families with spouses in tears, not being able to get their child's needs met, not being able to find a family doctor, which is something that many Canadians face, not just families of military members. But it is particularly problematic for those that have to move typically 3 to 4 times more often than a traditional Canadian family. And to be dropped to the bottom of a wait list for the needs that are vital for their children, that to me is unconscionable for the force, the organization that is defending us and putting their lives at risk.
And I just wanted to shift a little. So one of the things that we heard consistently through the study at Status of Women last year throughout sexual misconduct was, of course, the interference of the chain of command and how that impacted CFNIS, the SMRC. Have you seen a change in that? Have you seen a recognition of that interference or that problem that chain of command had played within investigations of sexual misconduct complaints, or have you not?
I would say that given the issues that are criminal in nature, and just to reiterate for the committee, the issues that are criminal or the complaints that are criminal in nature like that, we will refer them to the proper law enforcement agency to be able to deal with them. That is not within our mandate to deal with. The issues that are non-criminal in nature, it's hard to say, I think, at this point, whether we're seeing a large change or a significant change in chain of command properly dealing with them. I think we'll see that over time. I think the hope is we'll see that over time. I think with the greater visibility of these things we see in the media, there's a lot more heat and light on the chain of command to properly deal with these things. And I think in discussing this issue, particularly with the Chief of Defense Staff, he has very much said to me that he is holding these people to account, holding the chain of command to account. We will see. Our job is to see that over time and see whether that really is happening. But certainly, we will receive complaints every once in a while, and perhaps Robin can give an example of one. But certainly, we hear complaints over time that there are delays in getting a process or a misconduct issue dealt with. That is very, very typical of some of the complaints that we hear. But perhaps Robin could give you an example.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, and hopefully you can work in your example somewhere else. Colleagues, we are in our typical problem where we've got 25 minutes worth of questions and 20 minutes worth of time, and we will start to have our own grievances coming forward if we don't respect our staff. So with that, Mr. Motts, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and Ombudsman Lick, it's good to see you again, and Robin, thank you for being here. Sir, you mentioned that the most common grievances that you are receiving as an office has to do with benefits and family-related matters. So when you say benefits, what specifically are you referring to, and does it include the Phoenix pay system?
I'll answer the last question. Certainly on the benefits question, Phoenix is definitely one of the questions and one of the complaints that we do receive from civilian employees of the department. But in this case, I'll ask Robin to answer the first part of your question.
Thank you. So on the benefits side, it's really anything to do with compensation and benefits. So we get a lot of requests for information in this field. The CAF has a number of very complex policies and programs within. So a lot of the times people don't have a good understanding of what they might be entitled to. We also see a number of complaints related to administrative delays in the receipt of those benefits. We also see some related to outdated policies on benefits. The Ombudsman had mentioned PLD earlier, post-living differential, home equity assistance is also one that we hear about. And on the civilian side, the largest one on the benefits side, definitely, as the Ombudsman alluded to, relates to pay and impacts of the Phoenix pay system.
Okay, thank you. This is more of a statement than anything. I guess I've always been troubled since, with the military base in my riding, we have dozens of individuals who've had Phoenix pay system issues that haven't been resolved in some cases for several years, 3 years plus, some of them 4, affecting pensions, income tax paid and collected and whatever else. And they've called and called and called to get that resolved within the military, within the Phoenix pay system. And yet when the MP office calls, generally we have those resolved in 4 to 6 weeks. I don't understand why when the employees themselves call, the department doesn't take the same seriousness. And we've actually been told by the department that unless an MP office phones, they don't pay any attention to them, which is really sad. Anyway, Mr. Lick, you had indicated that you have, and Robin actually is the one who provided us the timelines, but the backlogs that you have. Now, are those backlogs related to from the time of complaint to resolution? And which is taking the longer? Is it the investigations? And why the backlog? Is there a backlog in getting ministerial support, a chain of command support to deal with a complaint? Or is the backlog within your particular office with staffing or funding? What does that all look like?
Well, certainly when we're talking about the backlog, we're talking about the backlog in the grievance system itself, which is the internal mechanism available to, in this case, to military members we're speaking about, available within the departments, not within our office per se. But we see some of the same situations that you were just talking about, where if we call with respect to a grievance, we will sometimes see a quicker response and a quicker action on that. That is not always, we try to only do that where there are compelling circumstances, because our role is not to, just because you call us, to put somebody up at the top of the queue, because that would be unfair every time somebody called us to as well. But where we see that there are compelling circumstances, and every situation is a little bit different. But certainly, there's a variety of reasons for that. And this is one of the reasons that we will be doing a systemic investigations into recourse mechanisms the year after next year, in this case. So because we feel that it is not simply a resource issue. We've seen that over the decades. Throwing resource at it gets it down for a short while, but it comes back. Why? That is the answers that we want to delve deeply into. I certainly have some ideas of it.
Yeah. Sorry again to interrupt you. Mr. Moss's time has expired. Mr. May, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here to the witnesses. The Office of the Auditor 2016 report on CAF recruitment and retention determined that the lengthy recruitment process, training delays, and files being closed when applicants were still interested, contributed to quality candidates leaving the recruitment process. The report also noted that the average time to enroll was approximately 200 days. In your work, have you noticed any made to the recruitment process to address the concerns identified in that report?
Well, I think certainly they are in the process now of putting some changes in place. The pandemic has had an impact on recruitment, as you've heard from other witnesses too as well. One of the most common reasons that we have complaints coming towards us is with regards to recruitment and the delays in recruitment. In fact, I was just speaking with a friend of mine the other day who is a reservist, and in discussion with his colleagues, it's the same issue we hear all the time, that the recruitment process is simply too long. There case that long. There are many ways you can do things online, but there are some issues that the CAF is trying to address right now, but simply the process is not too long. And I have to admit that on the civilian side of staffing too as well, there are very similar issues. The processes are simply too long in order for both the civilian side of the department and the CAF to effectively compete with the people that are just going to leave and go to the private sector.
Sir, do you know what the average time it takes to enroll currently?
Not sure of the time. I'm not sure if Robin has a timeline on that right now. To be honest, I don't think it's changed that much. But I'll just see if Robin has the number.
So I don't know if that number has changed. I know there has been the introduction of 2 virtual tools that they've used, but I don't know what the success has been. So I know they have the availability or the ability to do virtual enrollment and virtual selection interviews through the recruiting centers now.
You'd mentioned that COVID-19 had an impact on recruiting during the pandemic. Would you also agree that COVID-19 caused some of those delays we were talking about earlier with regard to programs rolling out?
In which programs are you speaking about?
Specifically, the ones supporting families. We were talking earlier in today's meeting about some of the commitments made by CAF, and that we're 3 years into that commitment. Would COVID-19 have played a factor, in your opinion, in whether those programs have been rolled out?
I don't believe so. I think the comprehensive military family plan was something that was approved in principle, essentially. Everybody agreed this is something that we should do. In this case, the Canadian Armed Forces and the department. It simply needs the resources to be able to roll it out and implement it. In terms of some of the other issues, though, that is in the domain of Seamless Canada, and in many cases within the domain of the provinces and territories to deal with, I truly feel that it's not so much a COVID-19 issue. This is something that I believe really needs some strong political attention to be able to bring the provinces and territories all together to deal with some very challenging issues, which it could be the professional qualifications of medical personnel across the country. which could not only affect and help and support the families that move across the country, I believe it could also truly help and support Canadians in general.
Thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you.
Madame Normandine, 90 seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I won't have the time to ask you a long question and to have an answer on the shift towards civilian life and the transition of their medical files. So I'll ask this question with regards to what you've already mentioned. The Defense Committee will have to provide a report of the testimony and to make recommendations. I'd like to know if we should make the recommendation that the Ombudsman should report to the Parliament rather than the Minister of Defense.
I think the simple answer to that is yes, I would support that type of recommendation. I think that's evident. And certainly for the report or the position paper that I put forward provides what I feel is the strong case for that, as well as draft legislation, which would enable that too as well. And so, yes, I would fully support that recommendation, but that's in the realm of the government and Parliament to be able to endorse.
If you could submit to the committee, please, the documents that you spoke to, that would be very much appreciated. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You unfortunately were cut off by our illustrious chair, and you were about to say that you have an idea of why those backlogs continue to occur, and then he cut you off. So I would actually like to provide you with the 90 seconds to complete your thoughts on that, to provide us with those reasons, potentially.
Yes, thank you very much. Again, we will look more deeply into that in another year or so. However, I think there's a couple of areas. One is something that I discussed with the Chief of Defense Staff a little while ago, making sure that people are held accountable for dealing with a particular grievance in the process. And in their performance management agreements, the chains of command all have, at least at the most senior level, all have commitments to make sure that the process is timely. And so we'll see how that goes. Again, it needs to be resourced properly. I believe one of the areas are the chains of command getting the proper advice in terms of benefit policy, proper interpretation of policy in order to provide a fair decision in a timely manner. That could be an area. Are the grievance committees and the grievance boards, are they being provided with the right people to be able to effectively deal with a grievance process too as well? I think there are some really, it's not something that I would believe that everybody would want to go and work for the grievance board. It's something where I think, but I think it is important that we have good quality people there in the long term, not just in the short term, but in the long term, to be able to effectively support the system. Without a effective, timely, fair grievance system, you will never gain the trust about the whole institution that you'll be treated fairly.
Thank you, Mr. Lickmans. Mr. Schmale, you have 4 minutes, but you didn't know you were dealing with an illustrious chair.
Absolutely. I have only good things to say about you, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity. As I mentioned to the witnesses in the first panel, I'm not a regular member of this committee, so I do apologize if some questions have been repeated. You were talking about length of time. What is the, I guess, average length of time to fix a problem or a grievance given to you or your office?
Well, in our case, so if a complaint is brought towards us, we will refer the individual to the proper process to be able to get it resolved. As I said, it's a difficult question to answer, though, because if there are compelling circumstances, somebody could bring a complaint to us, as what happened last summer, in which the complaints were 9 and 4 years old in the grievance system already. They came to us at those points in time. We felt the circumstances were compelling. They were facing, if I remember properly, some financial hardship. We helped them deal with it, and we brought it to the attention of the final authority in this case, and they were dealt with quickly, given the compelling circumstances that were in those particular situations. So it depends on when those complaints in the grievance process are brought towards us. So it's difficult to answer your question in that regard.
So just to be clear, just for that example you gave as well, those 9 years were going through the military process, and at that point then came to you or your office.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't know if you can tell us this off the top of your head, but what is the most common grievance you and your office receive?
Well, I think, as I said, the types of complaints we receive, the highest one over the 23 years of our existence is always benefits. The same would be in the grievance process.
Okay, and when you need to reach out to the department itself, how reactive is the chain of command or even the minister to remedy some of these issues, depending on the severity and type, etc.?
Well, I will say, and I've said to a number of you already in our one-on-one briefs, that when we have a complex case, and those complex cases are certainly not all the 14,000 calls we get a year, but when we have a complex case in which we're investigating, that could be one or two issues involved in it, or a very complex singular one, where we investigate and we find that the situation is unfair for the individual, and we make a recommendation to the department, over the last 5 years, 100% of those have been accepted and have been implemented or are in the process of being implemented. I said to many of you that that's based on the respect that our investigative work receives, but it's also, I think, believe that there are a lot of good people who want to do the right thing in the department. That's my belief.
Okay, this might be a bit of a strange question, so I understand if it's... I'm just curious, out of the grievances that, as you mentioned, they were able to be resolved, do you know any off the top of your head that were had resulted in punishment in the ranks or in demotions or anything like that off the top of your head?
Well, we have to remember that a grievance that a member brings forward typically is, say, in the area of benefits, they believe that they are entitled to a benefit. It is not a part of the disciplinary process. That is a separate process altogether. A grievance is something where you felt you've been treated unfairly or you're owed a benefit, and you're asking for the decision maker to look at your case and decide whether you should receive that benefit or you receive a service, whatever it might be. But it is not part of the disciplinary process.
Thank you, Mr. Smale. Final 4 minutes, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Ombudsman and his team for joining us today and for your expert testimony. I was listening to the questions and I was listening to your opening statement and kind of focused on the fact that you would deal more on issues that would cause someone to leave the military. I'm wondering if you're able to take any data from what you hear through grievances and apply that to the process to provide answers on how we might do better with recruitment. Just kind of flipping it around a bit. Wondering if you can take anything from those. They're not exit interviews, but they're potentially grievance issues that lead to an exit. Is there a way of flipping that upside down and finding a way to improve our recruitment process?
Well, certainly, and I think when we receive a complaint or even a request for information, a lot of that information fills our analysis of trends. So in this case, we are always looking at these complaints, requests for information, the actual investigations that may be carried out as a result of those complaints. And we're looking at those trends to see, are there some systemic issues in there that we need to look at more deeply, and that fills our systemic investigation plan. So in this case, I've just sent off to the minister a report on compassionate postings, compassionate status, and that it was a particular area that not only was I hearing it when I went to various bases and wings, but also the complaints and requests for information that we receive on our phone lines and our emails and so on, that told us that there was a particular issue in there. Perhaps the policy wasn't being properly interpreted, perhaps it was inconsistent across the country, and people were being treated unfairly. So that report is with the minister now. It will come out in the late April, May period publicly. And in there will be some recommendations around how people should be treated. We will do the same thing for recruitment if we see that there are particular issues there. The main issue that we've seen, and Robin can speak in detail towards it, is the long delays that we receive complaints about. I haven't been able to get an answer back. Those are the typical issues that we hear, as well as some areas where people feel that they've been unfairly denied access to becoming a member of the military too as well. But definitely the delays is the most common one.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Okay, so and this may not be a fair question to ask the two of you, but is when it comes to retention and people's decisions to leave the CAF, how much of that would be based on negative issues that might lead to grievances, or how much of it might be better pay from the private sector, or the decision that they just don't want to move the family anymore, or things like that? How many what percentage of the people that would be leaving the CAF would be leaving for issues under the grievance file rather than other issues?
It's a very difficult one for us to answer, and very much the commander military personnel would be the best person to answer that type of question. But certainly in the types of requests for information we get or complaints, we definitely see areas, and we will receive generally the ones where people feel that they've been treated unfairly. We don't generally receive a complaint about a person leaving because they want to go to another job. They've retired from military. We don't get those types of complaints because they're not really truly complaints. But we do see in the complaints that we do receive various areas there that either there are family issues in which, as I talked about, they cannot deal effectively with the family situation and and continue to be a member of the military, or they cannot get access to healthcare appropriately. They need to stay in the area where their children can be taken care of, or their spouse or partner can be taken care of. So there are a whole variety of reasons why people will leave the military, and I think that there's certainly that's in the realm of commander military personnel to be able to best answer what are the trends in that area.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, Mr. Fisher. Ombudsman Lick and Ms. Hines, I just, on behalf of the committee, want to thank you for your contribution to this study. It's been very useful, and we appreciate your time. Colleagues, we are standing adjourned.
Thank you.